Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 1:30 session in the Cutter Room. I'm your room host, Tim Gellis, and you're joined to watch Getting to Know Your Environment, Reflections on Self-Hosting and AWS Migration with Andy Zito and Charles Fulton. Before we begin, just a few reminders. Please be mindful of our code of conduct. If you have a chance to speak to any of our sponsors in the lobby area, please do so or check them out on our webpage. After the session, we encourage you to provide some constructive feedback. It's certainly helpful for the presenters and for everyone else as well. And lastly, I was just told to remind everyone, if you're going to the after party and you haven't gotten your wristbands yet, there are some on the registration table, and there should be some other ones floating around. There are these purple ones here. I think at some point we might just start like throwing them out if you still haven't gotten them yet. I'm not sure about that. If you ask them at the registration desk, they should be able to help you out. All right. Let's see if I missed anything else. All right. With all that said, let's get started and bring in our honored presenters, Andy and Charles. Thanks.
Okay. So the most important thing we have to do is share our screen. And then yes. All right. Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon. As Tim said, our talk is entitled Getting to Know Your Environment, Reflections on Self-Hosting and AWS Migration. My name is Charles Fulton. My pronouns are he, him, and I have been a web developer at Lafayette College since 2012.
I am Andy Zito. My pronouns are he, him. I was a web developer at Lafayette College from 2018 to 2021 when most of this WordPress migration took place, and I now work at Hampshire College.
Now, we're going to be touching on three key themes during our talk this afternoon. First, the idea that as an organization, you should always be evolving toward better practices. Second, that you should attempt to have your software, your deployment, and your infrastructure gradually converge to work in concert. These should not be separate concepts. And third, save innovation for when it counts. As other people have said, I don't know what's beeping. Okay. Save innovation for when it counts. As someone said yesterday, talking about accessibility training, do not reinvent the wheel. UPS. Nice. Well, we're just gonna ignore the beeping. So a little bit about Lafayette College, just by way of background. We are a small liberal arts college in Easton, Pennsylvania. Please don't confuse us with the University of Louisiana Lafayette down the road. We are the Leopards, not the Cajuns. We have an enrollment of about 2,500 students. We have been running WordPress at the college since 2009. We started with some old WordPress MU multi-sites, that is from before multi-site was part of WordPress in WordPress 3. One of those sites is still around today. And in the old days, we did things in, we had certain approaches. We deployed sites manually with SFTP. We didn't have good ways of managing user access at scale. So often when confronted by a novel permission situation or novel plugin situation, we said, you know what, we're just going to make a new multi-site for that and just keep at it. And in terms of the ownership of WordPress platforms has always rested within the IT department. But even at the beginning, we had an ad hoc collaborative process with our colleagues in communications, who obviously have a very strong interest in the branded web presence. But this was based on more individual personal relationships, and it was not formalized, at the organization level. And just to review, 2009, 2011, things that did not exist. No WPCLI, no PHP Composer for package management, no Docker. Truck Sheep is just a glimmer in Paul Gilzau's eye.
So From 2011, we're going to talk about 4 areas where progressive improvement took place during the time that Lafayette was hosting WordPress on campus. These 4 evolutionary paths can be boiled down to who was making decisions for each platform or each multi-site, how are we managing individual sites between those platforms, how are we deploying each platform, and how are we hosting each platform. To begin with site ownership, as Charles said, back in 2011, the collaboration was informal, ad hoc, on an individual basis. Web development technically owned the WordPress web presence because we had the keys to the server, but there wasn't a lot of structure there. So enter ITSM. ITSM is IT service management. It's a broad and complex methodology for organizing the services your IT department might offer. It's complicated enough to be its own talk or even its own conference, but all we really need to know here is that the core organizational unit is a service. A service could be your branded WordPress web presence. It could be your WordPress course sites, could be your LMS. And these services are owned by service teams. The 2 things to know about a service team are that service teams are cross-functional and cross-department. So again, you're going to be incorporating people from communications for content and governance, people from instructional technology for academic content and user training. And 2, service teams are continuously improving. They're setting metrics to define what success looks like for their service, and then working to make the service better and meet those metrics. So post-ITSM reorganization at Lafayette, it's 2018. Here we have an example of the web content management service team. You can see again, we have web development, communications, and instructional technology. The formalization of that team also allowed us to pull in college archives who are responsible for the archive it process, which is how we offer static site backups. So what's different here? Well, the difference is the added structure. The service team is now documented, right? Its purpose, the nature of the service is documented. Its membership is documented, not just in individuals, but in roles, which makes it resistant to personnel change. The service team is meeting weekly to talk about the health of the service and how it can be improved. And they're doing so using an ongoing single document agenda, which I mentioned mostly so that we can shout out Day Kibbolds and her excellent talk, Get Stuff Done, which will be linked at the end of this presentation.
So site management, here be dragons. So I mentioned that occasionally we dealt with permissions problems just by setting up new multi-sites. We peaked at a total of 12 separate multi-site platforms in 2017. That's a lot of multi-site platforms, even if you have a fairly streamlined deployment methodology, which we eventually did. It's still a lot. There will not be a quiz on all of those. And sites aren't immutable. News used to live under www, but then we determined that just for branding DNS reasons, we wanted news.lafayette.edu to be its own thing. And so back in 2013, before there were good tools to do this, we hacked it out of www and made it its own site. Its uploads are still in a weird place 8 years later because of 10 years later, good Lord. We've merged sites into other sites. We have a couple more that we think we're going to merge just to get the number of platforms down. And we move sites between environments. You're doing a site that needs an individual site that needs to be redesigned. Maybe we need to pull it out of production back into stage, or we need to make a copy of it if people want to work on the existing content. So we needed to be more flexible. Couple ways we developed to do this. We were an early adopter of the REST API. We went with version 1 of the REST API before it was integrated to core when we launched our last redesign in 2015. We have since updated. MU migration is a WP CLI tool maintained by 10up. It's like WordPress importer, but a little more robust in that if you point it at a particular subsite, it dumps all of the associated database tables and zips up all the uploads and just gives you a nice package, which can then in turn be imported into a different multi-site platform. All the URLs are rewritten. This is the most important tool we have for this kind of thing. I don't know how we do it without it. Yeah, MU migration. It's the third one on the list there. Yep. WP CLI plugin still maintained. Great. Also, WPMU plugin manager. There are no doubt other plugins that do this, but this is the one that we use. With WPMU plugin manager, if you have that on your multi-site environment, you can indicate for each plugin that you have on that environment whether user administrators are able to activate that plugin or not. So that gives you an additional level of control beyond whether something has been network activated or not. A common use case for us is the iframe plugin. We don't want to give that ability to just everybody. We want to make sure we've had the standard lecture about how to and how not to use iframe. So that's one where it's installed. They're not allowed to activate it, but we can activate it for them.
So how are we deploying these WordPress multi-sites? Returning to 2011, in the beginning, Lafayette was uploading WordPress code manually with SFTP to like a single web server. That got improved a little when the WordPress code base started being versioned in Git, and shell scripts introduced a little more complex of a deployment methodology. But things didn't really get interesting until Capistrano was introduced in 2016. So Capistrano is an orchestration tool that allows you to deploy to multiple web servers at the same time. And this was important because Lafayette was looking at doing highly available server pairs, where if one goes down, the other continues to host the WordPress web presence. And of course, to be able to do that, you need to be able to deploy the same thing to both of those servers. The final iteration of the on-premises deployment methodology was the pivot from Capistrano to Deployer. Capistrano is a Ruby tool. It comes from Ruby on Rails. Deployer is basically just Capistrano, but in PHP. So moving to Deployer not only allowed us to stop worrying about Ruby syntax, it also allowed us to do an artifact deployment, which is something Capistrano did not support. An artifact deployment is when you package up your code, your plugins, your themes ahead of time during your build pipeline, and then send them to the server as a package, as opposed to running commands on the server to pull down your code from somewhere. This is more reliable, it's more deterministic, so you can be more sure that what's built in your deployment pipeline is in fact what ends up living on your server.
And I should mention, if anyone was at Buffalo in 2017, I did an entire separate presentation about how Lafayette was using Composer and Capistrano as part of its build process. That's in the learning library, and it's linked in our resources slide at the end of this presentation. Uploads are managed. We're on our own shared file system, and we'll get to that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of technologies that allowed this to happen. We touched on Git and PHP deployer. Charles just mentioned Composer, which, like he said, is a package management system that we were using to pull down the theme and plugin code from the WordPress public repositories and from our internal repositories. It was essential to all of the deployment methodology that we were using.
Well, let's talk about infrastructure. This was an interesting journey. So I guess we could call this the second iteration of our on-prem infrastructure, but this was how I knew it as I got there. We had 2 web servers. We split the deployments between them. So again, none of this is highly available. Uploads stored on the server, and there's a single MySQL primary replica pair behind them. This works. This is kind of your baseline for running WordPress. It's not resilient in the slightest. It's not redundant. We had 2 data centers on campus. We were doing Red Hat virtualization. There's no redundancy. There's no resiliency. It worked well enough, but we identified resiliency as something we wanted. So we started tugging on that thread. And the thing of it is, if anyone's been down this road, you know, you can't just make one piece resilient. You've got to do it all. So we went from standing up proxies just to have better protection between, the web servers and the rest of the world. Eventually, that got replaced by an Nginx Plus cluster. In order to keep upload sync between web servers, we stood up a Gluster FS network file system. In order to provide resiliency for the databases, we built a MariaDB Galera cluster, and of course, once you do that, you need a max scale database proxy. So in the end, this is roughly what it looked like. There will be a quiz on what this looked like. I can still draw this from memory. We've torn a lot of this down, but it worked. But let's go back to that part where Lafayette is a small liberal arts college of about 2,400 students and an IT department of 35, but that's everybody. And the actual web team is about 5 or 6, and the actual people responsible for maintaining this infrastructure between us and the systems people is about 3. This got to be a problem. So it's time to talk about debt. So roughly speaking, there are 2 major WordPress releases per year, yes? We had 12 WordPress platforms at our peak. That's 24 major upgrade cycles every year, each with their own themes and plugins. Yes, there's a lot of overlap, but still, you've got to upgrade each one of these things and do some amount of quality assurance. Meanwhile, while we're doing all this maintenance of just the infrastructure, other stuff is starting to slip. Sites at Lafayette, it's our oldest WordPress platform. This is the one that goes back to 2009 and the WordPress MU days. Personal sites, course sites, committee sites, club sites. I ran the numbers about a month ago. I'd say about 16% of those sites are active, defined as updated in the last year and a half. We have an archiving policy. It's really great and robust. It's backed by Archive It. We have absolutely no time to execute. We had no time to execute it because of all the other things we were doing. Another measure of this, good 20% of the sites there are using 2011. Look, it's a great theme. We all respect it. It's old. It's inaccessible. This is bad. That theme needs to be turned off immediately. And probably sites that are still using it aren't even active anymore. One other example of debt. Okay, can I get a show of hands? Who knows what mod.xsend file is? Put your hand down, Andy. Okay, so in the old days with WordPress multi-site, uploads were not served directly from the upload path. They were passed through this handler called ms-files.php. All right, now I'm getting some nods. Excellent. This was done for ostensibly for security reasons until I think it was Andrew Nason about a decade ago. It's like, this is dumb. Why are we even doing this? And in particular, one really good example of the problem with this is by default, one thing that's not handled correctly is partial content. So if you have a video on a WordPress site that is using ms-files.php, seeking is not going to work correctly because it's not sending a 206 header. It took us forever to figure out why this wasn't working because, of course, seeking not working in a browser is about the vaguest possible problem you can have. Turns out there's an Apache module called mod.xsend file that addresses this. And so you install that module, you set a flag in WPConfig, and stuff magically works. Or you could actually just say this, I don't want to do this anymore, and we're going to run a bunch of database queries just to change what all the upload paths are. And Mika Epstein actually wrote a really good guide on how to do that. But again, sites, it has like 1,600 sites on it, so that's probably at least 1,600 tables we'd have to touch. That just sounds like it's going to cause more problems than it's going to solve. So again, I mentioned all the infrastructure stuff. We built a lot of that self-hosted infrastructure between about 2013 and 2015. So now we get toward 2019, 2020. A lot of this stuff's kind of coming up on when we need to think about upgrading or replacing it. This is not trivial. We're not even sure if we're licensed for max scale anymore to do upgrades. We're still on PHP 7.1. We're behind on WordPress upgrades. Maybe we should be doing containers instead. And oh yeah, GlusterFS has this memory leak because of how it interacts with our backup system. We never figured out why, but we had a cron job that just bounced Apache at midnight. Just reset the clock and the memory leak. It was fine. It worked. It was in place right up until the end. So we had this choice. We could maintain what we had, or we could adopt new stuff. But we'd come to realize that we absolutely couldn't do both. And there was also this other stuff that was actually of direct benefit to the user that we were not doing at all.
So enter Lafayette's pivot to cloud hosting. There were several reasons that the institution made the decision to pursue cloud hosting. One was that we wanted to improve the stability of our services and, of course, reduce the effort needed to maintain that stability. We also wanted to lower the barrier of entry for innovation and experimentation. One way that a cloud provider can help you do that is by giving you access to prepackaged provided services like email sending, file hosting. Rather than setting them up yourself, you can, through a few button clicks, get access to whatever the cloud provider is offering.
And just to re-emphasize that this was something that was coming from the top of ITS, because we were not the only service team that was feeling this kind of pain. But it wasn't just the WordPress folks' choice to think about a cloud pivot. This was a division, really almost institution-wide change that we just happened to be a part of.
Yes, that's right. So, returning to the service team, we asked them, how do you want to do this? These are 4 questions that illustrate the kind of considerations that a service team had to undertake at that time. So 1, what are our hosting options? What tools are we actually going to use to accomplish this migration? 2, what does it cost? And what are we willing to pay going forward to run our WordPress platforms in the cloud? 3, can we retire any technical debt as part of this migration? And 4, can we use any of the work we did on premises, or do we have to abandon it and start from zero? So in terms of hosting options, there are a lot of cloud providers that will let you host WordPress one way or another. And we divided them into 3 categories. Software as a service is you pay for WordPress, you don't get any control over the hosting, but you also don't have any responsibility for the hosting. Infrastructure as a service is sort of the opposite player to that. You aren't paying for WordPress at all. You're paying for access to cloud-provided low-level infrastructure constructs like a database, a server, a Redis cache. And so you're putting those together like building blocks to ultimately host WordPress. It's more analogous to the kind of hosting you do on premises. There's also platform as a service, which sort of falls in between those two. You're paying for WordPress, and you also get access to certain aspects of the underlying hosting infrastructure in a way that is usually tailored for WordPress hosting specifically. So as we were considering these 3 categories, we ran into a problem, which was that we had no idea how much it cost to run any of our WordPress sites, right? That cost was hidden within the cost of all of our on-premises server infrastructure. So when we were presented with numbers by software as a service or platform as a service providers, we didn't have the context needed to evaluate whether those offers were reasonable because we didn't know what we were currently paying. So we turned towards infrastructure as a service as a way to build out in the cloud something roughly analogous to the kind of hosting we had done on premises and learn what does it cost to run each of these multi-sites in isolation, which would set us up for a potential future migration to platform or software as a service if we wanted to get even further out of the business of messing with infrastructure.
And another reason that infrastructure was more attractive than it might have been otherwise is that we had other workloads that we were moving to the cloud. Moodle, web work, eventually Banner. So we knew that we were doing a lot of infrastructure as a service work anyway. And so there were some cross-pollination opportunities with what we were going to do with WordPress. If it had just been WordPress and nothing else, it might have been a different matter. Well, and that's the thing. Yes, Jim, we had the expertise. So we had the expertise and we could do it. If we didn't have the expertise, again, that also affects your decision-making.
So we were also asking, can we retire any technical debt rather than just doing sort of a blind lift and shift to the cloud? Obviously, we were able to just walk away from all the infrastructure debt we had accumulated on premises because we weren't using any of that infrastructure anymore. And that did free us up to focus on some of the technical debt that we couldn't walk away from as easily, like the fact that WordPress core is like, 10 or 20 versions out of date, although I hear that's going better now.
My colleague, Jim Nicknick, who talked about the portal yesterday, has been leading a series of sprints to get us up to current WordPress. And I think we're in the middle of 6.1. We are almost there.
Yeah. And as we learned more about cloud hosting and became more comfortable doing infrastructure as a service work, it opened us up to get rid of some more kinds of technical debt. For example, the proliferation of multi-sites that Charles talked about earlier, we were able to start consolidating some of them back down, which reduced the number of upgrade cycles and made management a lot easier. So we're doing infrastructure as a service, we're retiring technical debt, and we're asking, what can we use that we learned on premises? Well, obviously, we can use just the knowledge of how to host WordPress with infrastructure. But we also found that the deployment methodology that we had spent so much time working on and improving was flexible and portable enough to not only accommodate deploying to the cloud, but I think also be very well suited to the kind of cloud deployments we wanted to do.
So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to those 4 concurrent evolutionary paths, and we're going to step through them again, but it's the return journey. So we're going to step through them in reverse order, starting with infrastructure. So the nice thing about, this has probably been true of any cloud provider, but the nice thing about AWS in particular is in general, it was the same stuff that we've been doing on premises, just we swapped out the components we were maintaining for the components that AWS maintained. And so a good example of how this was easier is when we did Gluster FS, we bought new servers, we spent time configuring them. That is, we had servers that were actually hosting Gluster. We had servers that were needed to manage Gluster. This was a, 6-month process with a capital price tag. Elastic file system, console, create, job done. Also, the storage is unlimited. It just keeps expanding. And so the never-ending cycle of we are running out of storage, we must grow the disk. I don't do that anymore. I love that. One case, one other change, WP Super Cache did yeoman work for us for years, wasn't appropriate in this environment. Amazon CloudFront, just a full site cache with a very low TTL. Yeah. But one thing that we had to think about, and this is really where we had to stop and really have a gut check. When you're on premises with a somewhat, I don't want to say a fixed number of things you can do, but you're not going to just keep making new VMs if you're a small institution. So when we built the WordPress environment, we had to say, okay, what is our worst case scenario for traffic? You know, it's going to be like the time Gorbachev came to campus to give a lecture, or we had Tony Blair once. That there's going to be a lot of traffic. We need to make sure the servers stay up. So we provision our servers to handle worst case. That's fine when you're on a capital budget and you're not really paying for what you use. With a cloud provider, you're on a consumption model. You are paying for what you use, no more, no less. So that's a situation where you have to define a floor instead of a ceiling. And you think, okay, we need maybe this many containers to actually provide the service that we need, but we will let it scale up to handle any possible load. Say, for example, the college's return to campus announcement during the pandemic. And the cost of innovation is going to be low because you can leverage the expertise of your hosting partner. We had always wanted to have Redis for object caching just to make the administrative side of WordPress run faster. We never had the time and expertise to do it ourselves. Once we moved to AWS, it's like, all right, well, look, they have this thing called AWS Elastic Cache. We'll just configure this. We need to dial it in a little bit, make sure the caching is the right size, but that's a few afternoons work, not a whole project with no real timeline of when we're actually going to get it up and working. And we don't have to keep maintaining it now. Oh, and finally, this is almost just an optional extra, but it was absolutely beautiful. At about the same time we were doing all this, Amazon released what they call the Cloud Deployment Toolkit, which gives us the ability to define our infrastructure in code. So in the same project that deploys our WordPress environments, we have code, TypeScript, that defines this is what the container infrastructure looks like, this is what the database looks like. So it's all finally in one place with one version history.
So deployment, again, what changed? Well, as I alluded to before, not a lot had to be refactored about the existing deployment process. What changed was the target. So now instead of building an artifact and sending it to on-premises servers, we're building an artifact, packaging it up in a Docker image, and sending that to AWS to be processed by AWS's serverless Docker hosting solution. As Charles said, right, infrastructure as code allowed us to version the infrastructure and the software together. And that meant that we could also deploy changes to the infrastructure and the software at the same time automatically. This eliminated a whole category of issues and annoyances trying to coordinate infrastructure and software changes.
Site management. This almost got worse in some ways, but it's okay. When you host on-prem, you can cheat a little. It's like, I need to do a thing. I'm just going to SSH to the server and do a thing. you shouldn't do that anyway, but you definitely shouldn't do that in this situation. So now we do it properly. We have a Bastion host where we can run WPCLI, but it's fine. It's fine. It maybe got a little harder, but we were already pretty close to being able to work that way anyway.
So most of the changes to our WordPress site ownership happened back when we did the ITSM restructuring that I mentioned earlier. The service teams we developed at that time didn't need to be significantly refactored when we went to the cloud. What they did gain was the ability to have more direct and complete ownership over their platforms. So the web content management service team can now own not just the www main web page, but also all of the infrastructure that's hosting it. And that means that instead of having to coordinate with our digital infrastructure colleagues over the course of days or weeks to get infrastructure changes made, a web developer who's on the service team can go into the code and make that infrastructure change right away. So infrastructure changes became, I won't say easy, but more routine.
Pretty easy. Sure. So, yeah, how'd it work out? I'd say in the main, we're happy. We finished in the spring. Cost of technological innovation way down. We're able to introduce new things as we want to play with them. We're a lot more flexible than we used to be. Things are stable. Just not saying AWS doesn't have downtime, but it doesn't have very much of it. And it certainly has less than we did. And we're not vulnerable to things like a data center at back home losing power, which happens. And as I mentioned, we're now able to start really focusing on paying off organizational debt and focusing on user-facing improvements, getting caught up on WordPress versions and starting to deal with outdated sites. And at the same time, we completed a journey that we'd been on with our deployment. You know, we've been working toward having disposable instances. We finally got there. Our deployment model just kept getting more and more lightweight. And service team, it now owns the entire stack. So that's also just kind of more compartmentalized. Like we still work for our digital infrastructure colleagues, but we don't have to go through them for infrastructure changes, which we appreciate and which they appreciate. So it hasn't all gone perfectly, but I say in general, we're really happy with how it's played out, and we're looking forward to what we can do in the future. So at this time, we'd be happy to take your questions. And just at the end, we have one final slide with links to, I'll just show right quick, links to the previous talk about how really in-depth how the deployment model works, and a very long illustration about the whole ModX send file business. And finally, Dave Hibble's Get Stuff Done, which is the single best conference talk I have ever heard in my entire life. It changed the way we work at Lafayette. So thank you. Yes, Jim.
Yeah. So I was wondering, through AWS, how do you manage backups? What's your workflow there?
Yeah, so there's two things that have to be backed up when you're running WordPress, your uploads and your database. And in both cases, there are cloud native services maintained by AWS to do that. So we have 24-hour backups of EFS where the uploads are. And same, there's every 24 hours, there's a snapshot of the RDS instance for the database. And the infrastructure for all of our multi-sites is completely separate. There's no shared infrastructure. Also, they each have their own database, their own uploads. They're actually even deployed in different accounts. It's complete separation. So we haven't actually, nobody's made a mistake in the last few years. We haven't actually had recourse to go through a recovery scenario, but actually it didn't really happen on-prem all that often either. Yeah, straightforward.
Do you take any backups?
Just stay up there, Jim.
Do you take any backups off of AWS and put them local, or do you have them go to another space? Just Out of curiosity.
We are not pursuing an offsite backup strategy at this time.
Testing?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're using AWS as deployment tools. Have you looked into something like Terraform or similar? And if so, why didn't you choose it? Because AWS likes to kill things quicker than Google does sometimes.
Yes, they do.
So
Yes. So, right. So the actual way our deployment methodology works, so CDK compiles down to CloudFormation. And so then it's actually a CloudFormation change set that runs the deployment. We're running that in our own self-hosted GitLab environment, although that's also on AWS. We could. So as to why we didn't do Terraform, I think the simplest answer is that I went with a colleague to AWS Summit in 2019 when CDK got rolled out. We saw it and we thought it looked really cool. And we thought it looked cooler in Terraform, which we had limited experience with at that point, because we were just doing manual cloud formation templates at that point. And we liked it, we standardized on it, and didn't really look back. So I wouldn't say there's ever really a fair hearing for Terraform. That's just the direction we went in. And I guess the other thing that's cool about Terraform is the ability, in theory, it's adaptable for multiple providers. As if we were going to do things not like Google Cloud or Azure, but as an institution, we'd already decided that we weren't pursuing a multi-cloud strategy. So that just wasn't a capability that was interesting to us. We didn't need it. But great question. Thank you. All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming. And please feel free to hit up any one of us here or on Slack or anywhere else if you have questions or want to pick our brains about what it's like living on AWS. Thanks again. All right, what do we need to do here? Yeah, yes, we'll leave.
Well, that just about wraps up our session. Thanks again to Andy and Charles for a wonderful session. And please use the chat or the 2023 attendee social media channel to pose any follow-up questions or just continue the conversation. Please take a minute to submit the constructive session feedback. It enters you into a door prize and also helps our presenters. And it's located on the event webpage. This session is recorded and will be posted to the WPCampus Learning Library in the near future. The next session here will be at, I believe, 2:30 for Make It Your Own, integrating Twig templates with your WordPress block theme. And in the other room will be the How to Extend WP CLI for Fame and Fortune. Is there anything else in my notes? Oh, that's all. Thanks, everyone.
We're archiving, running a full archive. Just at that. Yeah. I mean, also, yeah, like. And then you're holding up all these buttons, and all this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. love it. I guess I got to think about accessibility. Yeah. Right. You know, it's just like. Yeah, it's kind of fun, right? I mean, in my WordPress, like I'm not. And so like, that's really great. Here, what's the context? Yeah. Yes. Right. We don't. We have a bunch of. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah. Well, AWS is so nice too.
Yeah.
I'm interested in this. You need that. Yeah. Well, we set up probably even just getting in there. So a couple of things. So one thing we have to do is that system. Exactly of what. It sounds. Me too, like I sit kind of on the border of looking in. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Just enough, just enough.
That's fair.
Now I have to. And you do get like, so like. Sure, and so. Biggest problem. So we're like, yeah. Right.
back from jumping jack, ignore me. Right? Road. That's my computer and around my notes. You know, in the hotel, things like that. Maybe one of them. It's kind of like.
Test, test. Y'all can hear me? Cool. Thank you.
So I got my kids all trying to get ready for the game.
Yeah.
I know, so like, okay, now it's fine.
Because if you were already done.
Oh, wow. Like one man. Oh, come on. I know. I had. Live chat. I did. You know, before, you know, let's just like. So nice dinner. Okay. This friend was talking about, right? Feel like my New York process puzzle line. Done. Oh man. And it's right.
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2:30 session here in the Cutter Room at WPCampus 2023. I am your room host, David Dashiffin Keys, and I am honored to present Joni Halaby's, or to welcome Joni Halaby to present the talk, Making It Your Own, Integrating Twig Templates with Your WordPress Block Theme. Before we get started, some news items. First, a little bit of bad news. We do have one person who attended the conference who has tested positive for COVID. They are no longer here in the space. They've already isolated and separated themselves from the rest of us. We do have masks at the registration table for those who might like to have one. We also do have an extremely limited number of tests. We have 4. So if anybody is experiencing symptoms and was sort of doing the well, it's hot and I'm not eating well and I'm not sleeping right, maybe I just feel a little off. If anybody's now thinking oh, okay, we do have a very limited number of tests. Take it under advisement when you get home, whether you definitely test when you get home just to be sure if you don't test while you're here. And hopefully we can all stay safe, especially due to the vigilance of the person who did feel ill, got tested, and then also isolated, as we hope has kept us all safe. So a little bit of bad news. On to what will hopefully be some fairly regular news for you all. Be ever mindful of our code of conduct. It's there on the website. Please review it.
If you have any thoughts on the code of conduct, it's actually up for review later this year. We haven't mentioned that before, but we're going to be taking a look at it, making sure that it still serves the organization well. At the end of the session, please do provide your feedback using the links that will be present on the schedule page. And a big thank you to all of our sponsors, especially Tulane University, that has provided some really lovely spaces for us to work in for the last few days. With all that said, let's get started and bring in our presenter.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to start sharing these slides. Share. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to be speaking today about integrating twig templates with your WordPress block theme. So my name is Joni Hallaby. I am a senior web developer at Georgetown University. My socials just about everywhere are at Joni Hallaby. And I love music, so there's going to be a sub-theme to this talk today of some of my favorite bands and songs. That being said, today's playlist is a collection of songs that you may or may not have heard. I promise there will be a complete playlist at the end of this, but we're all hopefully going to come with me on a story about what our themes are all about at Georgetown. I'm going to go through some just basic definitions because I like to normalize the terms that I use in my talks. And then we're going to go somewhere different now, which is a fairly different block theme from the standard WordPress block theme. And then we're going to conclude with some post-project thoughts, lessons learned, and some conclusions that we came up with from what I'm calling a very interesting experiment that we did at Georgetown. So enough chit chat. This is, by the way, my 4-year-old daughter, who, especially if you were staying in the dorms, you probably have seen her around. But let's get to it. So first, let's come with me on a story about our themes at Georgetown. So our websites, we support almost 400 sites, a handful of individual sites, and then 300 some odd sites that are in a multi-site installation. Almost all of these sites are using one parent theme and one child's theme. So we really like uniformity. We like having a standard look and feel to our sites. And to that end, we've been using Gutenberg blocks since Gutenberg was an alpha. We had really started working on it before WordPress 5.0 came out. None of that went into production until 5.0 was officially out, but we've been working with Gutenberg for a long, long time. We have a very complicated relationship. That is a whole other talk. Our themes were originally classic themes because we built our themes many years ago. And we sort of accidentally turned it into a hybrid theme because we decided that we really were excited about all of the functionality that comes with theme.json. We love the block styling customizations that come with it, the fact that we can turn features on and off and control things like color palettes and font choices. Because one of the underlying themes around our WordPress themes is that we like to control everything to do with our themes. We want our content editors to really just focus on the content and the substance of the sites. And we want control over the whole visual identity and the branding and the colors and the look of our sites. But we came to kind of a aha moment, sort of, when we discovered that with a hybrid theme, we found this post editor bug where it was very difficult to impossible to select, I have a typo in here, but to select a page template. There was a very odd bug. It was in core, and it just made us think, maybe we should try an experiment and see what it would be like to completely convert our classic theme and not have a hybrid theme, but to completely convert it into a full-on block theme. So what I'd like to suggest is some definitions of the terms that I'm planning to use today. So first, since we're talking about themes, let's define a theme. From a developer perspective, a theme is a folder in your WordPress installation that contains all of the front end markup, styles, and functionality for your sites. So this includes your CSS, this includes your JavaScript, but more relevant to what I'm going to be talking about today, this includes the templates or the files with all the markup for a particular kind of page. So a template defines how the front end of a page is marked up from the site header to a site footer. It includes, you can have templates for all different kinds of pages. So for posts, for pages, so your evergreen pages, archives, the home page. And the big difference between a classic theme and a block theme is how these templates are coded. We're going to get into that right now. So in a classic theme, the templates are PHP files and they live inside the root of the themes folder. These templates, because it's in the scope of a theme, they're automatically recognized by WordPress based on how you name them. And all of the backend functionality is in PHP. So classic themes love PHP. There's so much PHP in a classic theme. In contrast, there's block theme. Block themes are a relatively new feature in WordPress, and they're really declared as soon as you add a theme.json file to your theme folder. So as soon as that file gets added to your theme, it kicks off something in WordPress that says, aha, you want all of these block theme features, don't you? And at that point, in a traditional block theme, your templates, you can define your templates as PHP files if you really want to, but the point of the block theme is to be able to define your templates as HTML files, and those end up living in a templates folder inside of your theme directory. And these templates are also automatically recognized by WordPress. Something else that I'm going to be talking about is a template part. A template part can be used to define a specific part of your template. So a template can consist of maybe a site header, your main content, maybe a side navigation, your site footer. You can also define a template part, and that's going to be a container, basically a container block that's going to be used to display other blocks that will be part of those main chunks of your website. And the template parts are available inside the block inserter, just like any other block, so they can be used by content editors. Switching gears a little bit from core WordPress definitions to pattern library. Now, pattern library is something that we at Georgetown use, and we use it as our style guide. A pattern library is kind of what it sounds like. It is a library of style patterns and markup patterns that you can use throughout a website. We developed our own homegrown style guide. It's written in KSS Node, and it's loosely based on atomic design. It has those same concepts of smaller pieces going into bigger pieces. We use different terminology. So we don't use that chemistry-based terminology of atomic design. So atomic design is traditionally atoms, molecules, and so on. We've kind of renamed those to sort of fit how we think of the parts of our website. So we have base patterns, and then they can combine into a component pattern, and they can combine into a block pattern, and then a page pattern. And all of these patterns are written in a combination of Twig and SCSS. And our GU pattern library, first and foremost, it follows our university visual identity guidelines, where we adhere to accessibility requirements. We've committed to following WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. And the whole reason behind our pattern library is that it's very important to us to make sure that our styles remain consistent across all of our sites, whether we use these patterns in a WordPress installation. They can also be applied to a static site. If somebody wants a random Drupal installation somewhere, it was built to be easily transferable to different content management systems or different kinds of websites. And this is just an example of one of the patterns in our pattern library. So our pattern library has, each folder is its own pattern. And we have basically 3 files. It's usually, the standard is really 3 files for each of these patterns. So we have this index.scss file that defines, it defines some basic information about the pattern, and it defines the CSS styles. We have a twig file. So this is actually an example of a pattern on the screen for just a regular text heading. So in H1, H2, et cetera. We have a heading twig file, and then we have an example file. So when we give people an example of like, hey, this is what a heading should look like, that gets rendered through that middle file in there, the eg-heading.twig. The heading.twig contains the markup for the pattern. And as you can see, it is a basic heading, just like I said, H1, H2, et cetera. We can customize the heading level by passing in a heading level parameter. So this can be used for any of the levels. We can optionally pass in a class. And in kind of the center of this pattern, we have the block heading content. So in that twig block, we can pass in heading text. So the heading text is another twig variable that gets passed in that has whatever our heading wants to say. And if we want to include this pattern inside of other twig patterns, we can use the include function and just say include. We've namespaced all of our patterns. So we have this heading pattern falls under a namespace that we've defined as a series of text patterns. Text names. Text patterns that fall under the text namespace. So under the text namespace, that's denoted by the @ sign. The text namespace has this heading pattern. And for this particular pattern, I'm passing in just the heading text of may I suggest. So this pattern would actually default, if I just go back to the pattern, it would actually default to an H2, and that's set by that second line in the twig file. So our set heading level, it will default to 2. So any heading pattern, it just defaults to the to an H2 if I don't say, hey, I want this really to be an H1 or an H3. That was a very fast overview of our pattern library. This is not a talk about our pattern library, but if you want more information about how to build a pattern library, my colleague at Georgetown, Reed Piernock, did a very wonderful talk at WPCampus just 2 years ago, and it is online. There's a recording there, and feel free to check it out. Highly recommend it. So, block themes. I'm going to take you somewhere a little bit different now. And we're going to talk about how we built our block theme experiments at Georgetown. So one of the requirements of the block theme is that we really wanted to use the functionality of theme.json because we found it very exciting. We found it very refreshing to not have to lock down certain things like I said before, like color palettes or font families and things like that. And have to do that through the PHP. Using the functionality of theme.json made these design decisions that we wanted to enforce in our theme so much easier. It locks down the core design of the theme so that we can adhere to our university visual identity guidelines. And one of the other requirements for this block theme is that we really wanted to use the markup and the patterns that we've already defined in our pattern library because we did all of this front end work. We didn't want to have to redo that for our theme. We wanted to be able to leverage all of that work from our pattern library. So our block theme, it uses templates because anything needs templates, but we were not very excited about the idea of template parts because template parts inherently, they contain other blocks. But those other blocks, like the core blocks in WordPress, those blocks don't hook into the front end of our pattern library. So they really didn't help us get that one requirement of wanting to use the markup from our pattern library. So we really needed something that was a little bit more customizable for our use case. And we were also not very excited about template parts being editable by our content editors because, again, we really want to lock down our design and our sites. So we started thinking about other solutions to creating a block theme, but not using template parts. So instead of template parts, we registered theme-only blocks that call our pattern library patterns using the Timber library. So what I'm displaying on the screen now is a screenshot of the folder and file directory of the theme that we started creating. It has an assets folder, which really just housed very basic CSS and JavaScript that we would need in the theme that does not exist in our pattern library. It has the blocks folder, which I will get to in just a few minutes. It does have a functions.php folder that's not actually required for a block theme, but we have a lot of extra functionality like customizable settings and things like that in our themes in general that necessitated a functions.php folder. But the main part of the screenshot is our open templates folder, which has a series of HTML files for the templates that I want to define in our theme. So we have the regular index.html, which is the default, page.html for evergreen pages, single.html for posts. We also define a couple of page templates. We have 3 page templates here: a chaptered page, landing page, parent-child page, and a separate template for our front page or home page. And then, of course, at the very bottom of the screenshot, theme.json. So these template files, in a block theme, they're HTML files. So these HTML files, all they contain are HTML and references to different WordPress blocks. And that's all you get in these HTML files. So the WordPress blocks, they're referenced. I'm sure anybody who's worked with blocks has seen these. They look like HTML comments, but they reference the WordPress block as WP : and then the name, the machine name of that block. So this is an example of the index.html template that was in the block theme that we had created. So it starts off with a block that it's actually a custom block that we use. So I prefaced all of our custom blocks with GU for Georgetown University. So it starts off with a custom site header block. And then inside of the main tag, I have a custom page breadcrumbs block because we like breadcrumbs. A custom page title block that defines a heading class of page title. We're going to dive deep into that in a second. And then the core post content block. And that core post content block is what is going to display all of the content, all of the blocks that you put onto your page. And after the main tag, we have another custom site footer. So the takeaway from this slide is really we have an HTML file that is, I don't know, 20% actual HTML, but it is mostly calls to WordPress blocks. And a lot of these blocks are more universal blocks that are things that we want to lock down the design for, which is why they are custom blocks. And all of these custom blocks are custom blocks that we define specifically for our theme only. So I'm going to dive into that block in the middle, that page title block, just so we can take a look at what that looks like. So these theme blocks are dynamic blocks that call these external patterns from our pattern library. If anybody has seen me talk before, I'm a very big fan of dynamic blocks. That is also another talk. Ask me questions later about that. I will talk your ear off. Because they're dynamic blocks and because they are theme blocks that I don't want our content editors to mess with, I originally made made the decision to only register them on the server side, so only register these blocks on the PHP. I did not need an editor UI because I did not want our content editors using these blocks. I don't want an editor UI. So I actually tried an experiment where I did not register them in JavaScript, and they still registered and I was still able to use them. So I did not have any JavaScript for any of these theme blocks. So a deeper dive into this theme block. My block is really only 2 files. I throw a README in there because I like READMEs, because I like documentation. But in the middle of the screenshot, this is a screenshot of my blocks folder that I briefly referenced in my last directory listing screenshot. And inside this blocks folder has a subfolder of all of the custom blocks that I've defined for my theme. So to deep dive into page title, the page title block has a block.json file and a register.php file. My theme.json file, super simple. I have 3 things in here. I am defining the name, the machine name of my page title block. So we've namespaced all of these blocks with GU. So it's GU/page-title. I gave this block a title just because I don't actually remember if that is required, but I like giving things titles. It makes things a little bit easier to read. So I gave this a title of title. And I gave it a description just so any future developers who are kind of going to this code knows what this block is about. But this theme.json, it doesn't define anything else. It doesn't define an example. It doesn't define attributes. It doesn't define anything else because it is something that I'm really going to only be using within the code of my block theme. The PHP side is a little bit more interesting. So my PHP is registering my block. So I'm registering this block from the block.json using that register block type function. Below that, I have a public render function. And in my public render function, I couldn't fit all of the code on one slide. So my render function, I kind of expanded on over here. So my render function, the first thing it does is it grabs the global post because this block is a block that's going to display my page title. So it needs to be able to access the post. It takes a look and sees if any heading classes have been passed into this block. If I passed in a heading class attribute from my theme, I'm going to use it. If I happen to pass heading text, if I want to hard code the heading text, I gave myself an out to do that. But really what I want to do in that middle line is I want to grab the post title. So in the middle line, let's see if I can point to it with my mouse. In this middle line right here, I'm setting this text variable to take the post and grab the post title from my current post. And then what I'm returning is I'm using the Timber library to grab my pattern from the pattern library, and the path to my heading pattern should look familiar. That's the pattern I went over a little bit earlier. So I'm using that pattern library text namespace. I'm grabbing my heading template, and I'm passing it a few things. So because this is a page title, I really want to give this a heading level of H1. My default for this particular pattern was in H2s, but I really want to make sure that my page title is in H1. I'm passing in any header classes that I have, and then I'm passing in the header text. And this Timber fetch function gets kicked off when I put this code into my theme template. So in my index.html, I'm calling this page title block, and I'm passing in my heading class, knowing that my heading level is already going to be hard-coded as an H1, and knowing that if I don't pass heading text, this block will automatically grab the post title. Just reminding ourselves that this is our pattern. So the heading level will get overridden from an H2 to an H1. I'm going to put my heading class right along with the classes in my heading. I'm going to grab the post title, put this in place of my heading text variable inside of that heading content block. And this is what my front end markup looks like at the end. I forgot to put class equals in here, but spell check is great, right? But this is basically what my front end looks like. My front end markup is an H1 with a couple of class names, the title of my post, whatever that title might be. Kind of a quote unquote real world example. So if in my post editor in WordPress, I have a page with a title. This one has a title of somewhere different now. I have some text below it. On my front end, it gives me my page title, which is styled with my Georgetown visual identity guidelines. We have our lovely Georgetown fonts. Our Georgetown blue is the color of our title. And all of these patterns are coming from our pattern library. So we can keep this going. We can keep this going because these theme only blocks are really just blocks. So I can use them anywhere in our templates. They can be used as children of other theme only blocks. So I can combine all of these blocks. I can combine a site title block with a custom navigation block with a custom search block into a larger custom global site heading block and put that at the top of my theme. I can do the same thing with the site footer and can combine a Georgetown logo with a footer menu with a whatever else I want, copyright notice, and have all of those patterns come from our pattern library. And we have patterns for all of this. We have so many patterns. It's so great. So what did we learn from all this? Or as I lovingly call this section, goodbye, Pluto. And other lessons, other issues and lessons learned from this, what I call an experiment. So we had three big issues with this. So the first issue was block visibility. So even though I only registered my blocks in the PHP and I did not register them in JavaScript, I was very surprised to find out that these theme blocks were still visible in the block inserter, which was a problem for me and for our team because we didn't really want them to be seen or be edited or be moved or we didn't even want our content editors to acknowledge their existence. It was supposed to be seamless. And so that was a problem. And the fact that these blocks were not registered in the JavaScript also caused the block editor in the customizer, which is not a feature we use a lot, but I used it very briefly just to test things out. And the whole thing caused a block error. So the solution to that was really, you really do need to register your blocks in the JavaScript, even if you don't want an editor UI. But you can hide the block from the block inserter, and that's really, really the way to go. And this is half code, half pseudocode, but this is generally kind of what you want to do in order to hide a block from your block editor. So what I have is in PHP, I have a function that I just called hide. And outside of this function, I would define an array of blocks that I would want to hide. So I have a conditional inside of this hide function that says, okay, well, if I have an array of blocks, this hide function is going to loop through all of the blocks in the block inserter, and it's going to say, okay, well, does the name of the current block match one of the names in this array of blocks that I want to hide? Okay, yes, it does. Then I'm going to update my one of my supports fields to inserter false. And when I set inserter to false, the block is hidden from the block inserter, and it's wonderful. We do this for quite a number of blocks that we don't want our content editors to use. And then you just call this hide function by adding a filter for blocks.register block type. Issue number 2, child themes. And this is where we got really, really stuck because we discovered a core bug where child themes cannot find a parent theme directory if both themes are block themes. It was opened. So this is a core bug. It was opened this past November. As of when I wrote these slides, maybe a couple weeks ago, this was still an open bug. And this issue actually became a deal breaker for us because we really need child themes. And if the child theme can't access the parent theme directory, we can't really use block themes just yet. So this ended up being a problem for us. But our third issue is also a big problem because our theme is way too complicated. I barely scratched the surface of what's going on in our themes. We have a lot of customizations, a lot of custom settings, a lot of admin pages that will let a content editor put in things like their department address, their department name, their office hours, their phone number, things like that. And we have so much functionality that it was very hard to scope and map all of it in a transition from a classic theme to a block theme, because what was really going on behind the scenes is that I had to rewrite everything to get a block theme to work. Like you can't really just migrate a classic theme to a block theme. You're basically starting from scratch. So in order to start from scratch with a complex theme, you really have to map every single piece of functionality that you have. And that was going to be a project in and of itself. And that was not something that was in the scope of, hey, let's experiment. So conclusions. Like I just said, converting a complex classic theme to a block theme is really, really complicated. And it turned out that really a lot of what we were doing was not super 100% fleshed out for production because of all of the other complexities that we have, like outside of the scope of this talk. It was a great experiment. We were successful in getting our block theme to talk to the pattern library, and I call that 100% a success, but it did not really make the block theme workable in production for us just yet. But we really decided that something like this is really best for a brand new theme where you can just start from scratch and really plan out your theme, plan out everything that you want for your theme, and really just kind of build up from there. The last call. These slides are really the tip of the iceberg for our block theme, but you can find these slides at talks.jhalevy.com/block theme. You can find me at my website at jhalevy.com. I am on the WPCampus Slack. I am in most socials. I am at Joni Halaby. However, on GitHub, I am at that dev girl for a variety of reasons that had to do with consulting. Long story, but I'm not changing my GitHub handle. So I am at that dev girl on GitHub. And if anybody is a fan of singer-songwriter or modern folk, all of the headings from this playlist or from this talk came from this playlist. So I would like to thank Eddie from Ohio, Brother Sun, Susan Werner, Girly Man, Vance Gilbert, and Red Molly for the inspiration for all of these titles. And you should definitely go check them out if you are into that kind of music. We did it. Thank you, everyone. And if that's the QR code for the feedback URL. So if you would like to leave feedback, please do. I'd also like to really, really thank WP Campus because everybody has been amazing. So thank you all.
As of when I left my laptop in the back, there were no questions from the online folks. Are there any questions in the room? All right. In that case, thank you, Joni, for a wonderful presentation. When Joni is not writing code, I'm going to, because I have the mic, I am going to take the opportunity to rep Joni's book. Joni has written a wonderful children's book called Sweet Little You, with illustrations by Lisa Wee. A loving and unique children's story about different paths becoming a family, showing that creating a cherished family doesn't always involve two parents. So if you've got littles, check out Joni's children's book. In addition, please use the chat and social media and our 2023 attendees Slack channel to thank our amazing presenters. You can use our 2023 attendees Slack channel if you want to continue any conversation or have any other follow-up questions. Please take a minute to submit your feedback, which helps the presenters and enters you for a door prize. This session was recorded and will shortly be added to the WPCampus LinkedIn, or online learning library. Those names are way too close. The branding problem. Please enjoy a snack break. The next sessions will begin at 4 p.m. with the presentation in the cram room titled University of Mary WordPress, a small public liberal arts love affair in a small public liberal arts love affair. And here in this room is developing a design system within the block editor. We'll see you then. Okay. Welcome. We're almost at the end. We have the 4 o'clock Central Time session today here at WordPress WP Campus 2023. Nick Novak will be presenting developing a design system within the block editor. As has been the case before we get started, don't forget about our code of conduct. After the session, please submit feedback using the links you'll find from our schedule page. Doing so does enter you into for a door prize. So if you've forgotten to do so for any of your prior any of the prior presentations you've attended, do so now. Please keep in mind that we couldn't do this without our many fine sponsors. I think last session I gestured this way to find the sponsors, but that's a TV. And out of the corner of my eye, I definitely thought it was that banner. The banner's over here. So thank our fine sponsors. And with all that being said, let's get started. Take it away, Nick.
All right. Now I know it's the last session and you've probably been inundated with information the last 2 days. So hopefully there's a little spot in your brain that you can pick up some information during this talk. So I'm going to be talking about developing a design system within the block editor. So design systems are important when it comes to consistency and setting standards and providing a shared language across entities. They empower product conversation. They bring awareness to what can be created. They can build a path to a seamless and rapid prototyping. They build quality and standards, and they can empower ideation for more people who can benefit from the practice and the work that's already been done. All right, so my name is Nick Novak. I am the web product lead. This is kind of a new role for me. I've been in it for the last few months. I started out as a front-end web developer. Actually, it's been 5 years last week. So I started working for the College of Engineering in the communications and marketing in 2018. And during that time, I've worked pretty much with the block editor and developing our design system that we call 42. And I work closely with our awesome web team. We have developers, designers, UX specialists, web specialists, you name it. They're great. All right, so why a design system? It provides a foundation for your editors and your theme users. They lay the groundwork for design and ideation, and they can provide a collection of components for easy site building. They help keep your sites consistent and bring forth any sort of brand identities that your college works so hard on. And who doesn't like a nice organized system that everyone can benefit from? So what it can do is kind of nudge the editors into following a certain style guides and branding practices. Standards and functionality can be set to help build consistency in your sites within your organization. We quickly found that if you lay the groundwork to help your editors build great experiences, then you're feel less like you're building within a box and you're limiting their options. So we during this whole process, we just really try to kind of nudge our editors into this kind of design, but we do it in such a great way that it feels like, like they're getting all the tools that they need to build, great websites that they need. The goals and a meeting of a design system. So the system, it's a combination of the parts that work together, and the design is the look and feel and the function of all those parts. So a design system is more than just what something looks like. It's a collection of patterns and definitions that interconnect and give the system the look and the feel and how it all works together. So the design system's goal above all is the experience. All right, so the 4 experiences that should really be in focus when you're kind of developing a design system and working with it, in WordPress is above all the user, the editor, the developer, and the stakeholder. So the user experience, provides a reliable and functionally consistent user interface. Your visitors enjoy an experience, that was built for them, with them in mind. The research is done. Everything is, with them at the forefront. These are the people that are coming to your site. The editor, their experience, they want a product that's easy to use and it's consistent within their editing experience. They want to be able to kind of spool something up quick and have those components ready and willing just for them to start designing. And then a developer, they need an easy to integrate components and define patterns. Designs that work with the functionality is key. And then your stakeholder experience, you want to provide them with a general overview of how the product will evolve and how it grows and where it is today and where it'll be tomorrow. So why WordPress? So ever since the introduction of Gutenberg, WordPress has kind of made itself more prime for integration with the design system. So it has that component-based methodology at its core with the use of blocks. So most of your elements and your components are ready for you with, to use with the capabilities of customization. So WordPress has come a long way with its modular methodologies. Today, we can use the tools provided to help build our design system. Those tools are there to help us set those standards of practice and ease our editors into a design. So the landscape at Michigan Engineering at the communications and marketing is we first started, building this approach in early 2020. So that was kind of the kickoff of our, new design system. Just before that, we launched a couple kind of microsites just to kind of give us that feel for working in like the block editor, and that kind of primed us to really start thinking more outside the box and wanting to get all our entities under one umbrella within a design system. So today we kind of have this product mindset with an agile approach to iteration on our work. So, before it'd be like, oh, a department needs a site or something. We design like, a child theme or just a theme, hand it over to them. That's the design for the next however many years. I'm sure, a lot of you probably experienced something like that at some point in your careers, but, it's like, here it is, have the keys, call us in 5 years and we'll redesign it for you again. So right now we oversee 8 college department sites that's in a multi-site. And then we also oversee our main college site, our news center. And then we also have a small handful of microsites. So those just kind of include like, whether it could be like a lab that needs like a certain site, somebody has some sort of grant they want to show off, research. There's even, our strategic vision site that where you can display like, the college's strategic vision on like a nice, formatted site. But so we kicked that off in 2020, literally like January, we met up, had this idea, and then a couple months later, we had to do it all in a completely different environment because we all know what happened. And so over that course, just a little over a year, we launched it in summer of 2021. And, we started using only the blocks. And over time, we've gotten to a point now where we are working with a block theme, and we are building it with full site editing in mind. I'm going to say full site editing. I can't remember. There was a talk earlier. Someone alluded to it. I think it was you, Steve, right? Yep. So it's like they keep changing the names. So they're calling it the site editor, but I'm still going to call it full site editing for now until really have to drill it into my brain. But with this update, we're allowed to build a theme is like a block theme, including our templates and our template parts, the part of the editing experience. And then we also incorporate the theme.json configuration to set our standards and our best practices with our designs. So I'm going to break things down just in like a methodology so we can kind of understand. This is, I think Joni in the last talk kind of alluded to atomic design. So we kind of use atomic design to kind of help us understand, help our office understand and get this kind of, philosophy and methodology, into an analogy that, most people don't understand. So like I said, it's an analogy just to kind of help us better understand. And I'm going to break this down in a way that we can kind of word it into kind of the components of WordPress and how everything is laid out and structured. So, and I just want to say, this is Brad Frost. If you want to look more into it, just, there's the these slides will be available, and there is a link at the bottom here, but Brad Frost has put together a really nice compilation of all this kind of stuff. So the first is the atoms. So these are the basic building blocks of matter. It's our foundational building blocks in our user interface. So these are just like the simplest sort of blocks that are available to us. So these are just like paragraphs, headings, lists, anything that's just like a single element. So just one example is kind of like our headings here. So here I just have us showing all the breakdown of all of our headings, just kind of the typography, the fonts we're using, and the sizes that go along with them. Next are molecules. So these are just kind of the groups of the simple atoms bonded together to make a distinctive new property. So in our system, these are just the relatively simple groups of UI elements that function together as a unit. So I think of these more of like the blocks that are not very complex, but just, they have multiple elements. So, like a quote will have, a couple paragraphs housed in a container. Audio usually has a few, HTML audio items, and then columns are just series of just like groups essentially. But an example here is just our quote block that we use. So you drag and drop the quote block in there, kind of gives us our branding. We have some, our maze quote here, and then our fonts, and then, our quote with our author. Organisms, those are relatively complex UI components composed of groups of molecules or atoms. So I like to think of these as like our patterns and reusable blocks that we use throughout our design system. And so here's an example of one of our patterns. So this is a query pattern right here. So we use this on our news center. So this is kind of the heading of our news center. And the way this is kind of designed is over here on our left is a fully customizable feature story. So we like to keep that customizable for our editors, because if you made that kind of your first post, and once the new post comes in, it's just going to get cycled through. So our people on our news team like to kind of really give an impactful story and try to give it time to really sit there. So rather than just having the first and foremost story, they like to kind of keep that there. So we chose to keep that customizable so they can keep that there as long as they want until another kind of feature story comes out and they want to push that one. With that said, everything on the right there is just a reverse cron pulled in with the query block. So these are all your items that are just like recently published, placed in here. That block is completely dynamic, pulls in there. So, all right. So we'll step away from that, analogy a little bit and kind of talk about how we kind of piece those together. We combined all those components, and we usually create, templates, template parts. These allow our users to be able to have a consistent experience across all their pages. And speaking of pages, our pages are just, our pages and posts, which are gathered by the editor into a template and rendered all out. So, all right. So now we have some like basics of like how our design streams kind of function, pulled together, and the way our philosophy works. Let's talk a little bit about bringing in a WordPress and then utilizing that with the block theme and then the full site editing experience. So block themes essentially take a standardized system, which is WordPress, and allows you to create kind of your own unique experience. So we give our editors the tools to build the experience for their site visitors. So most of the editing is done in the editor. We do a lot of our basic kind of theme, like templates and components built in the editor, and then kind of pull them out and place them within our theme, and then we add the additional styles that need to be done. So with this, we write like a lot less PHP switching to block themes. So all those templates that you're used to writing in PHP, now you can kind of build them out in HTML. So in fact, this is just a little snippet of our theme with Gutenberg and working with blocks prior to full site editing. So you can see it's just PHP and CSS, but this is it now with block theme enabled. So now you see that's it was at 58% PHP. Now we're down to 16. So, and it's taking over a lot of JavaScript. I will say like the JavaScript that's pulling in there is a lot to do with our icon library, because we pull those in with the SVGs and it's quite large. but it just shows the scale of a lot less, we're writing a lot less PHP nowadays. All right, so I want to talk about 4 key tools within our design system that we take advantage of to kind of create this sort of experience for our editors, users, developers, and stakeholders. So I'll just start right there at the top with our theme.json. So like I've alluded to, this is a configuration file, but this is where your global styles and settings live. So here is where we can generate our global specific styles, our block styles, and then our global settings. So I've been trying to get into a habit of whenever I need to style something new, I'll go here first because not every CSS style is available to you in the theme.json, but I try to use that as kind of my basic place to start. And then anything that I need to add to it, then I'll go over to CSS, or in our case, we're using Sass. So the functional updates in theme.json keep happening. Being on this forefront and doing this for the last 4 or 5 years has just kind of taught our team to just constantly be looking at documentation and keeping our nose to the ground, and just kind of making sure anything that's coming, we can integrate it into our theme. So things like when 6.1 came out, that kind of gave us the ability to have fluid typography and spacing. So we've integrated those sort of things into our headings with the fluid typography. 6.2 added sticky position block support. So you can enable or disable, the ability to, make something sticky within on your page. Also, they've added shadows and mid-height, and just they seem to be constantly adding these items still. Just keeping on the forefront of those and seeing what you can add style-wise or setting-wise is really key when you're working with the theme.json. So I'll talk about global specific styles. So global specific styles. So these are your top level styles. I like to think of these as kind of your basic styles. So things like color and spacing, typography, and elemental style. So these are kind of your top level that kind of cascade down. So one example here is just like I've said, color and typography. So we're using variables throughout the theme.json, which will then output as CSS variables. So the output for this in our CSS, as you can see, it's just places it on the body tag. We have our background and color and our regular color, and then all of our typography declarations that we've made. Here's another one where I've taken the styles, the elemental styles for our H1 and our buttons. Same thing. We have that use of variables throughout our JSON, and then that just kind of will also create those variables in CSS and pull all the items that you need into there. So block styles. So we can also set these styles for specific blocks, which are great. So we like to kind of use these as the preset styles for our editors when they're composing a page or a post. So this is, same thing. This is kind of where we start when we add these styles to all these different blocks. So here I'm grabbing the post date. So which is marked by core post date, and then I'm adding those, same thing. I'm just kind of, since this is just a, text block, I am just kind of styling some of the typography or with the font family, the size, the weight and line height. And then same thing, we can kind of see it'll just find that class and output it onto our front end. Global settings. So these allow us to set presets that fit into your design for your editor's experience. So a lot of these settings that are set here are kind of set within the actual editor. So when an editor is working on a page or a post and they add a block, these settings are applied and they'll render with these presets. So the editor has the ability to change these, but we have this kind of approach where if you kind of give them that standardized kind of preset, and if you do it in a really well-designed way, most times people don't change those, especially if things are consistent, because our editors want that consistent, experience for their front end user, and being able to kind of have that out and they can go to their site and it looks like a U of M site. Like they want that. So here's one example. So here I've set the default palette to false. So that just turns off the standard palette that, WordPress will put in there. And then you can create your own palette. In this example, we have a much larger palette, but in this example, I've just gone with the U of M standard maize and blue. So. All right, so we talked about some configuration of the theme.json, but I'll talk about how we kind of use our template and parts within our design system. So templates, prior to full site editing, like I said, you're creating all these templates in PHP. So a lot of the kind of settings are done in a way where, if anything, those need to be updated, then they are done on the back end by a developer. So now this kind of gives us this power to the editor themselves to kind of update their templates and change them how they want. But with that said, we kind of do this approach where we provide them with the templates they would need. And most times they kind of stick within those realms and create the sites they need based off the templates we provide. So here's a list of the templates that we have in our theme. So as you can see, these probably all look very familiar. You got, things like page and search and single. And then we also have things where stuff like some of our editors like to have landing pages for certain campaigns or anything that they're running. So we'll create like a landing page HTML, which kind of lets them have that ability to have more of a very blank, customizable page. So then they can add their own sort of heading and change that around and make sure it's not like within their actual site. So it's kind of hidden by obscurity because it's not within the navigation. So no one can really go to it. So which is kind of like the idea behind having those landing pages. So here is another example of one of our templates that are in the editor. So usually when I create these templates, I'll create them in the editor first. And I'll try to create as much as I can just based on the editor experience. And then anything where it falls flat, then I will add those CSS style attributes to them. So this is just our single template. So this is for one of our posts. And then how that looks on the back end is I'll essentially export it right from the editor, put it in here, make any updates that I might need to make that, need some extra hand holding or anything like that. And they'll set in there. So like I've kind of said, this is where things get a little tricky. So templates are composed of blocks, but they can be overwritten by a user. So it's one of those things where if you really don't want your editors changing these sort of items, there are some template locking features that can happen, but right now they're a little primitive. It's getting there, but there's also, like some benefits to this as well, especially when we talk about our next thing, which is template parts. So just like templates, these are comprised of blocks, but a repeatable component that can be used across the templates. So just like before, these are edited by the user as well. We like to use the template parts for things like simple things like the headers. And right now we just have headers and footers. So we have 4 different headers that are kind of requested by, different items that editors want for their sites. And the beauty of the template parts that we find is, so things like our header, these can change across all of our different sites. So, navigation items are going to be different for each department. That way they can create this one heading template part, and then it can cascade to all their templates, which then just has more consistency across all of their sites. All right. Next thing I want to talk about are patterns. I mentioned earlier, patterns are part of our methodology as we kind of talk through design systems as components. Within our system, we have just over 30 patterns structured in a dozen categories. So here are some of our patterns. So we have patterns that are sectioned for things like all of our posts, simple text patterns, headers. We give to people alerts CTAs, layout patterns, which page and post as well. Those three kind of head into the realm of more like starter patterns. So if like an editor wants to start a certain page from scratch, like they don't have to necessarily do it from scratch. They can grab one of the patterns that has the full setup and layout. They can place it on their page and then they can update that content as they go. So here's one of our patterns. So this is one of our heading patterns, our header patterns. These are used across the interior of our pages. So we bring these into, so we use these a lot on our college page, and our department sites use them a lot. So essentially they're just composed of multiple blocks. So here we have a full cover block, and then nested inside we have our post title. So the nice thing about the post title is whatever you name your page or post, it'll automatically grab that and place it in there. So if it used to be you would just put like a heading block in there and they'd have to title it out whatever they wanted. But the nice thing is now, right when they bring this block in, it just knows like, I'm going to grab the title and I'm going to place it in there. So it kind of gives the editor this kind of, like feeling of like, these are getting completed for me. And then in there, we have an H3 heading block, which just applies the, some extra helper text to that post title. And then we have a navigation block below that. Another series of blocks that we, or patterns that we build for our editors are CTAs. Here's one of them. So this is kind of like a large call out. In this instance, we kind of use helper. So instead of using like your lorem ipsum kind of, placeholder stuff, like we actually use like some helper text. So the title is kind of the title of it. And then we have these kind of paragraph text that kind of, explains like, hey, this is like what you could do. And, and it's best to keep it short and 50 words or something. So this is just kind of adds to that experience to kind of help them, write their content correctly for their front end experience. So. And then once again, like, this is just essentially a cover block with a branded background image. And then within that, we have a columns block, 2 column, and then just like any columns block, it will throw in the column block within that. On our left, we have our image block. So that's up to the editor to choose whichever one they would like. And then they can edit the heading and the paragraph block to go along with that. So this is where like patterns get kind of tricky because sometimes patterns are just essentially a collection of blocks that essentially get copied into a page. So the reason why I want to kind of talk about this a little more is because we've ran into a few issues with this as well. Is if you need to change like the block layout or anything of your patterns, any patterns that have already been copied, like already placed on your page, they're going to have that old design. So essentially what happens is if you want to change the layout or anything of a pattern, and you do that, any of the patterns that have already been added to other sites and stuff, they don't get that same sort of layout and design change to it. So the reason why I know so much about that is because we made a lot of patterns off a block suite, because at that time, like a lot of people are using block suites because block suites were great at that time because they were filling in the gaps that WordPress didn't have. So we composed a lot of patterns using this certain block suite. Well, over time, the block suite kind of fell off the bandwagon of keeping itself updated and keeping its security and stuff. So with another design iteration, we ended up getting to a point where WordPress is caught up. So we were able to kind of translate a lot of our patterns away from that block theme and just using WordPress patterns. It's a lot better now. I feel like the block theme that we did, or the block suite theme that we used was it was pulling in. We were using a section block, which kind of we were using that as the cover block, but the cover block didn't exist at that point. So it did all that kind of structural stuff that we needed to. But then as the cover block came along, it allowed us to really hone in and and have something that more robust that we could use. But I mean, lessons learned, we've been doing this the last 4 or 5 years. So there are some pattern locking techniques, and we use these across our patterns as well. So this is just a little chunk of PHP code that just for example, I added in a little bit of a locking feature to it just to kind of show how this kind of functionality works. So you can lock it by move or remove. Move will lock the ability of you to actually move it within the pattern, and then remove locks the ability to just like delete it. So I like to use the move if it's some sort of structural block that you're using, that if it gets removed or moved, it's totally going to break your design and your layout. And then I will use the remove as well for like a lot of design elements or any kind of branding or anything that we just want in there. So if you're going to use that pattern, we don't want to see that certain element, taken out of there. All right, so that was just patterns. And now I want to talk about reusable blocks. So reusable blocks are a collection of blocks that are similar to a pattern, but the content can stay consistent. So if you're finding yourself, you're using the same content across your site, then it can be a perfect candidate for a reusable block. Right now they're created and published in the editor, but they are going to actually be moving into patterns, and they're going to be using a thing called synced and non-synced patterns. So non-synced are essentially what the traditional way of patterns, just what I've shown you. And then synced patterns are patterns that essentially have that reusable block kind of functionality behind it, where it'll sync the content and keep that consistent. So here is one example of a reusable block that we use across our sites. So on most of our pages, we use, within our posts, if there's any sort of experts, which are they can be researchers, faculty, students, and they're mentioned within a story, we like to kind of highlight them and off to the side, and then have the ability for a user to kind of click view their full profile and see what else they might have done across campus. Right here we have Mortimer Cooley, who was the first dean of the University of Michigan College of Engineering. So just to an example. But the nice thing about these is we can place these across multiple posts, and then say Mortimer Cooley, he becomes a emeritus professor, or he tacks on another kind of title. We can add that in the reusable block, and everywhere that block is being placed, it'll just cascade down. So we actually see that a lot. Professors become chairs, they join some society, they do something, and then and the nice thing is in our new design, we've added them to an accordion because we've gotten to the point where faculty members like to paste a lot of titles onto their profiles. So as those kind of build, then we'll have that kind of nice structure. So here's another one. So at the bottom of our posts, we like to place a media content. So we do that for that same sort of reason. So like Kate here, like she writes a lot of articles. So she's at the bottom of all of her posts. So if she has a different phone number or changes their name or anything like that, or gets a different title, then we can do that in one spot and it'll cascade to all of our posts. So here's a few last things I just kind of want to address, just kind of some stuff we've learned doing this for as long as we have. Documentation. So I'll admit, like, we could probably all do better at this one. It's definitely a most disciplined aspect of developing a design system. So, and I get it. It's we all kind of fall in that trap of it's hard to write documentation as you're coding. You're getting those flow states and you're just going away. But documentation is what brings you to a single source of the truth. It's best for your team and best for your editors. Our editors use our guides a lot. I know our team, we all benefit from the documentation that we've done. So creating the documentation that suits your correct audience. A design system is a mix of a component library, documentation, and style guide. And the audience for each one of these items is different. So they should be written by the correct person who's crafting each one of these. So developers should be writing documentation for their code. Designers should be creating the style guides, and then the UX professionals should be writing the how-tos and documentation. Post-launch. So you spent the months researching, designing, selling your ideas, prototyping, redesigning, developing, and now you've launched it. But a design system isn't a one and done thing. You know, like I've said earlier, we've gone away from that approach of here's your design, enjoy, call us again 5 years later. It's a living, breathing thing that needs constant nurturing. So after the design system was launched and our editors had time to work with our system, we had that moment of like that design and practice moment where we were able to see what was being used and how. And then we had that moment of reiterating designs that either didn't work or needed improvement. And we also did a lot of cutting of the fat of unused components that came out of the assumptions from our designs. You know, we had a lot of, oh, you know, our editors need these, but maybe they'll want this stuff. And, you know, and there were some things that they thought they needed that, you know, they didn't really need. And there was things that we thought they would need, but they didn't really need. So, and, you know, it's just that constant keep your ear to the ground and add any of that functionality and updates that, you know, come with WordPress and any kind of plugin updates. So we're constantly on the bleeding edge of WordPress and, you know, throughout this entire process. Some lasting lessons I kind of alluded to the third-party plugins, you know, choose them wisely. Kind of like I said earlier about the block suite. You know, we really jumped on a certain block suite and it kind of fell off, and, you know, it's still in there and we're still kind of using it. But I've been doing my part and I have it pulled out of most of our sites about 90%, and I want to get it the rest of the way there. So being on the bleeding edge is great. You know, rolling in new tools and functionality as it comes is awesome, but also, you know, being right there at the forefront of stuff. We've definitely done a lot of things that gets changed. So WordPress might want to change how they structure their classes. And you wrote all those classes for that previous structure. You got to change those as you go along. We've even, we needed a solution to our navigation block. And right at that point, WordPress released their new navigation block in beta. And we decided to roll major design revolving around that navigation block. And as time went, new functionality was added, things were changed. I probably rewrote the styles for that navigation block maybe 3 or 4 times. So listen to your editors. You know, they're the ones that are working in this system like constantly. So, you know, I talk to people in our office constantly who are working with our design system, and I talk to people who are working outside of our design or outside of our office within our design system. So, you know, they've come to us like, hey, can you do this? And we're like, I don't know, can we? And then we look at it, and most times we can't, and sometimes we can. And so they, you know, they come up with some good ideas too. And then one last thing I want to talk about is design defensively. I don't know, my people in the office probably get sick of me saying this, but I kind of come up with this term, design defensively. When I was learning to drive, my dad used to say like, that car is going to pull out in front of you. And then when he wouldn't, I'd be like, well, he didn't. He goes, well, you got to learn to drive defensively. So I like to do this approach of design defensively, kind of think of like how your editors are going to use your components. Like, are they going to change the layout? Are they going to want to move stuff around? And if they do, then your design should cater to those as well. So thanks. My name's Nick. I've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. I've learned a lot. So if you want to talk to me after this, or I'm on the Slack channel, I'm in LinkedIn. You can find my information on there. Yeah, hook me up.
Hey, Nick.
Hey.
So just one question. It was clear that there was some feedback coming
Mhm.
from the various editors at your institution. I was wondering, how receptive were they to this new design system you created for them?
So most of them are pretty receptive. You kind of sell it as a way of like, hey, this is a new design, like, this is, cutting edge technology. And I will say, like, a lot of them were pretty receptive of it. Some of them, are a little kind of taken back because a lot of the editors that use like our design system and any of the stuff, they're busy already. And this is just kind of another thing that they need to kind of do. They need the training, they need to learn. It's tough, but most of them were really receptive to it. We provided things like office hours. We have a 42 design system Slack channel. So we respond to people in that channel. It's also like builds that community of like, someone has an issue and they speak about it in the channel. And then of course there might be 2 or 3 people who've had that same issue and they help each other out too as well. So yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, Nick. So I'm just curious, you mentioned using the block suites and so forth, but have you had to create any custom blocks?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
you
So we have created custom blocks. There's usually that kind of comes out of that realm of, like when we've gone from our old theme and moving to the new one, it's like, okay, where are the gaps? Like what has to be customized? A lot of those were things like events blocks. We have like something that pulls in the events and people can display those kind of similar to like an RSS feed and post on their pages. Also things like another one that's pretty cool is we have an like alt metrics block, which I don't know if anyone's worked with like alt metrics. What it is it's kind of like it's a special score. So if you have like certain research that you do, and it gets a lot of traction, it gives you a special alt metrics block. So we use that a lot on our posts because if somebody's doing a lot of research and they've submitted this paper and it's getting shared around and getting referenced everywhere, that alt metrics block showcases a lot more. So it's a really popular thing with people who do a lot of research. So we kind of had to customize that stuff and build it as we go. So
Yeah, real quick, do you have like a theme or an example zip file or something that's really well done with the atomic kind of design system?
So our theme is kind of locked down because it's not owned by me, it's owned by the regents of the University of Michigan. So I can't really kind of share that sort of stuff out, but if you want to like talk about more stuff, like I'm happy to kind of allude
I
to
didn't
it.
know if there was a free one out there.
Yeah. No, this is we do use the WordPress block themes like as its kind of base. So it does run on top of that, that theme. So oh, I got one more from Andy.
Hey, thanks for that, Nick.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I guess I'm just wondering if you ever ran into a situation where maybe an editor, a department wanted variations on a particular block. So like maybe the faculty example, potentially there's conditional logic. If they have one title, that'll never happen. But if they have one title, just show that title, no accordion. If they have multiple, so something like that.
Yeah.
Just does that happen?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It happens all the time. Yeah, we get like we'll get certain requests and we always listen to them. And then if they can be done, like, and we have the capacity to do it, then, we're really receptive with our editors, and our editors are really receptive to us, which is great. We have a really good relationship with them. So, if they have a certain thing they want and it can happen, then we can. If not, we'll try to find that point to get to there. It might not be exactly the point of the thing they want, but we can somehow work with them to get to where they want to work with them.
Okay.
And we're fortunate enough, we have, we got our developers and our UX professionals and our designers that can help us with that as well. So,
Okay. With the particularly with conditional logic,
yeah.
With the example I gave, does that sound like a simple, easy thing to do, or?
Well, so the nice thing about that example is it is essentially just a block. Like they can add as many as they really to their heart's consent. So they can, what it is just essentially a series of paragraph blocks. And then with the reusable block, since it is built in the editor, it just pulls that stuff all automatically out for them. So something like just having a lot of titles, because we've worked in the past where we're like, oh, they should only display one title. And obviously that didn't work out. So we kind of had to do a redesign iteration to where we can display it in a way that that is more fluid and laid out a lot better for that consistency if they want one title or if they want 12. So that's where that kind of defensive design philosophy kind of comes into play. So we kind of got to work, we kind of got to work with them and make sure if they want 12, it looks more seamless rather than, it breaking. So
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Minnie.
All right, that wraps up this session. A big thank you to Nick for the wonderful presentation. As we have been saying, please use the chat and social media. Please use the Slack and social media and other things to continue the conversation. And if you have any follow-up questions for Nick, you can find him there. Yep. Please take a minute to submit feedback using the link you'll find on the schedule. That helps us, that helps Nick, and it will help the folks who plan 2024. The session was recorded, and so we'll post it to the WPCampus Learning Library as rapidly as possible. Next up is closing remarks in room 1. So if you're here with us, just go over there because nothing's going to happen here. This room is done. So, and if you're here in New Orleans, please do join us tonight for the after party, which starts, I have 7 p.m. written down here, but right as I walked up here, I saw there was a message in Slack. I wonder if it was just the time zone confusion or not, but check the schedule. I think I got it right, but double check. And that's it. Thank you all.